now that you have that interview, or not just for a job, but literally anyone or with anything, how do you get like your personality across? You're just in this box, or it's on the phone, which, you can't tell, if you make a little joke, if they even smile or anything. For me, I will say, one of my professors, who asked some questions. So thank you, Barry. But knowing that, it was just a conversation between myself and the person who was interviewing me eased a lot of my nerves. I don't think it really, and Barry taught me this, but I don't think it really has to be just a one-way conversation. It can be, you're asking them questions. So I definitely learned that from my professor. But what kind of are your tips of either doing interviews over the phone, or over Zoom? How do you get your personality across?
Practice. The more interviews you can do, whether it's for a job you actually want or not, I would say the better. So I had a couple different jobs that I was interviewing for, and one of them was for one that I wasn't really totally sure that I wanted, and also one that wasn't really like directly related to my experience at all. So being able to, one, not only get my personality across, but also be able to sell myself and what was on my resume was like an extra challenge. But I think going through that interview process, despite that, actually helped me for when I did get an interview for a job that I actually wanted. I knew how to sell myself. I knew because I could do it to a job that I wasn't totally even interested in. So it took me tons and tons of practice before I was able to kind of get your statement down was the first.
Yeah, you're like elevator pitch.
Your elevator pitch, exactly. Yeah, took me so long to be able to get that down. But practice was really the way to go.
And that's a good point too. I just want to add in, like, the elevator pitch and just trying to sell yourself too is so hard. And maybe it's easier for other people, but I'm just talking from personal experience and like advocating for yourself and like why you would be a good fit. And like Anne, I think that just goes back to what you said of like practicing, and just, having conversation with yourself of like, okay, why do I want this job? Why am I a good fit? But yeah, anyone else? Any tips?
I think just like you, Meredith, I think Barry gave me some of the best advice on interviewing and the fact that it should be a conversation, because it changed my whole perspective. Because I remember when, even like back in high school, when I was interviewing for part-time jobs, like my part-time jobs, I interviewed with people that I knew from the community already. So it was a conversation. And those were some of the easiest interviews of my life, not only because the job was not as high stake, but also just because it was easy to have a conversation. And then you go for things that you really want, and you kind of like, okay, I have to be super professional. I have to like check all the boxes. I have to be absolutely perfect. And once you get out of that mindset, I think, and be like, hey, I'm going in, I need to learn just as much about them as they need to learn about me, because an interview should be two ways. And that really changed my mindset, and just not trying to change who you are. Because I think when you just speak like you normally would, without, some of the less formal things, like I'm not going to call someone that I'm interviewing with dude, because that's something I do all the time to my friends, but I'm not going to do that. But yet my personality can still come across, because it's just easy when you have a conversation, it's natural.
Exactly. Good point.
I agree, but I also feel like for me, it's about just like being honest and like asking questions. Because I feel like it's hard, like, yeah, it's like a conversation, I agree, but it's also like, if you don't know what you're getting into, it's hard to like know what way to like direct the conversation, or like even how to answer a question. Because sometimes even like the language in the questions for interviews, it's like kind of like, I don't know what that means. Like,
right. Yeah.
If you're asking me something right now and I don't know how to answer it. And like, if you're not candid like that, and if you're not honest, like, you might end up like not getting the job, because they're like, oh, well, like we asked her something, and like, instead of like telling us she made something up, instead of like telling us she didn't understand or something like that, or like, it's just like, for me, it's just like, be honest. And like, I just have a habit. I'll just talk forever. And like, I don't know if that comes across. I just like, yeah. And like, for me, I'm like just honest in general. Like, I try not to like sugarcoat things. Like, I'd rather like hurt your feelings a little bit and like be like, or not hurt your feelings in a job context, but like be
honest
as I can, and just like kind of like not apologize for it later, but like acknowledge it later and maybe fix what I did wrong if you have like a critique for what I did. But like, I'd rather like just be authentically myself and like ask questions if I'm confused or I don't know how to answer anything, and just like, as I keep saying, just like be honest, because if you're not, then like they're gonna hire someone or not hire you, like hire you or not hire you because you came across a certain way and not the way that you are, or like the way that you wanted to come across. So
yeah, it's a great point.
I totally agree with that, Adamari. I mean, I think in the job that I have now, I ask them to dive in more on their question on every single one. And I think for probably 5 out of 6, I said, I don't have experience in that. I want to learn, but it's something that I felt like every degree program out there for what I want to do doesn't offer that experience. And COVID kind of took all of the options for internships away. And so it was just kind of crazy that they still wanted to hire me, even though I didn't know, but it was just like a thirst for knowledge that they were like, okay, we'll teach her.
Exactly. Bonnie, I'm curious, how did you get your personality across when interviewing for this job for a stand-up comedian? I know that's a very like specific question, but I'm just curious.
Well, that job, how I got that job is really interesting. I didn't send in a resume.
Okay.
So someone I had met at a comedy club, because I went to go see like a show, who I like vaguely knew, and we met up there and she was performing, had recommended me to him because he needed an assistant because his other assistant had left very quickly. And it was honestly, it was more just me listening and like saying like, oh yes, I have a job. Like it was very much like, when can you start, rather than what's your experience? So that's not like a normal job in any regard. But
that's okay.
But I think for myself in interviews in general, the big thing is, it sounds bad, but just trying not, like, you need to prepare, you need to know what you're walking into, you need to have questions, you need to know who you're interviewing with and like their background, but not putting all that pressure on yourself to like, because I am definitely, when I have an interview, I'm like, I need this job. I want this job. Yeah. This is the job. And just trying to remove that and almost not caring, but almost having that approach and attitude where it's like, if I don't get this, it's not the end of the world. Something else will come along. So that's how I would normally approach and try to get my personality across.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a really good point to make, that, in a lot of job searches, especially now that we're completely virtual, sometimes, and a lot of times, it really takes luck. No matter how good at an interview you are, how much you've practiced, how much of a conversation you're having, a lot of times it takes luck. Like in Bonnie's case, in my case, I had a good friend of mine from college who had interned at the organization a few years before and was able to send my resume. And that's how I got my initial interview, right? It took luck. And maybe this is a piece of advice for people who are coming up to applying now. Be kind to yourself. Like, no matter how many applications you send in, how many cover letters you write, sometimes it just takes that one break to get you there. And that's not something that you can, like, no matter how hard you work, sometimes it just takes a certain moment. So be kind to yourself and keep working, but also be ready for when that opportunity strikes.